Good afternoon, everyone, if you're joining us from UK, or maybe it is morning time or even evening. Wherever you are, probably you're at the workplace right now, or maybe you're at home. And what a coincidence that today actually I have amazing Louise Scott. She is mental fitness coach and a psychotherapist. So if you're at work right now and something is a bit itchy-witchy, it's a time to join us and listen what Louise Scott can tell you about mental fitness at the workplace. Louise, thank you so much for joining me today. It's my pleasure to have you in my studio, and I'm looking forward to learn from you and to allow our audience to hear all from you as well.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm really pleased to be here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. And where are you based right now? What are you up to? Whilst we're waiting for people to join, it will be also great to hear where people are joining us. So could you please share with the audience, where are you based right now?
Right. So I'm based in a small town called Linlithgow, which is just outside Edinburgh in Scotland. And as I look out the window now, the beautiful sunshine that we had yesterday has completely disappeared, and it looks really what we would call dreek, which is a bit rainy, a bit wet and not very warm.
Oh, that's upsetting. But I must say, I love Scotland. You know what's amazing? Even though you are there, you don't sound anything like Scottish.
No, I'm not Scottish at all. I'm originally English. I'm from a place called Worcester, down in the kind of middle of England. But I met my husband down in London when we worked in London, and he's Scottish, and his work brought him back up here. So I've been here, oh my goodness, probably for about 17 years now. But I've not managed to pick up the accent.
Well, I don't blame you for that, because actually I love Scottish accent, but I think it's quite challenging to pick it up, especially if you still communicate with the rest of the world. But I must say, I wish I would be there because I love Scotland. But I can see people actually joining us from Leeds, Richard McCann. Hi, Richard. I hope you're doing well. And we have Christopher from Australia, North London. That's amazing. We have people joining us internationally. This is beautiful.
Fantastic. Hi, everybody.
Great to see everybody. So, Louise, I was really excited to speak to you today because I know that you are the person to speak about mental fitness at the workplace. What do you think about the recent situation, what was happening with the world? And I wouldn't like to go into like hours of discussion about the coronavirus and lockdown. But what do you think it's important to remember about how that situation affected the mental fitness at the workplace?
Ooh. Well, I think it's had quite a big impact, and in many, many different ways. For some people, the effect has been incredibly positive for them. They found it more relaxing. They found it easier to kind of manage that work-life balance, which makes them happy and therefore increases what we call their mental fitness. But for others, it's not been quite as plain sailing. People found retreating into the home incredibly anxiety provoking. They've had to get used to very, very different ways of working. And some people have found it so lonely. They're so used to throwing ideas around with work colleagues, and not being able to do that in person has had quite a detrimental effect on a lot of people. And I also think as we're now moving to the place where we're coming out of lockdown, it's the same thing. Some people are delighted to be coming out of lockdown. Can't wait to get back into a place where they can interact with people. They can kind of really put those barriers and lines back in place as to what is home and what is work. And then you've got other people that coming out of the home and going back into that environment is actually even more scary than going into lockdown. Yeah. So we've got a huge spectrum of emotions, I think, going around people's mental fitness as we actually come out.
Which is quite scary when you think about it, because I think, again, it shows how people are always divided into categories. Those who deal with issues, challenges, and problems quite easily, and those who are actually struggling. So which one category do you think you belong, Louise?
Yeah, and I think we all, and the first thing to say is that it's actually okay if we can't cope with certain things. As I said, some people found it hard to go into lockdown and can't wait to come out, and vice versa. So we all cope with things incredibly differently. And I think it depends on you and your resilience and how you cope with the world. I like to think I enjoy both angles of it. From a very personal perspective, I've loved having my family home, having my husband here every day rather than traveling, not having to run around with the children. So from a personal life and family perspective, it's been great. From a work one, it's just been a completely different way of working. I think I had always had the mindset as a psychotherapist that it's all about the person and it's face to face and it's working with that individual. Until you're faced with this, well, you either stop work and don't do anything with them, or you start to use new technology. So I've had to adapt quite a lot. So I've had my ups and downs along the way, as I'm sure everybody has.
Oh, yes, that's very true. And I must say that once we went into this lockdown state, I was thinking to myself, okay, how is it going to impact everybody? You know, as you said earlier, some people will be okay with that, some people will be not. And my point of view, my personal point of view, and I'm not saying that this is the truth, this is just my own opinion, but we have to be able to adapt to whatever challenges are thrown at us and whatever is happening in our lives, whether it is at work or in a private life. But what's surprising that when people started spending more and more time at homes, this when their work environment started affecting them even more. Because one thing is to leave any issues which they have at home, close the door and be at work, right? In a different world, different environment. But when you are at home and you're still facing some challenges here, and then you can't close the door, you're still at home, and you face some work challenges, I think this would actually affect a lot of people, considering not all people enjoy their work. What do you think about this, Louise?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think the way when we're at the office, the way we deal with issues that come up is we tend to kind of pull on resources around us, particularly if we get our energy from people around us to actually work through things and resolve them. And people have not been finding it as easy to do. But I have to say, people have adapted really, really well to the likes of Zoom and Teams and all of that type of thing. So I think we're all more resilient than we give ourselves credit for. And I think we are adaptable to change. I think it's just been incredibly different. And I think as well, one of the biggest changes as we go back is everybody who has been able to work from home has proved it is doable and possible. And I think we're going to see a very, very different kind of working pattern for individuals as we go back as well. And I think employers will be even more open to that.
Oh, yes, which is very, very exciting, because what can be better than actually feeling rejuvenated, calm and relaxed and not spending hours and hours being stuck in traffic and work, and as a result being more productive. I think that's wonderful. But Louise, if somebody doesn't know what actually is mental fitness, could you please tell us in a few sentences, like what mental fitness actually means?
Okay, so mental fitness is about our control over our physiological, psychological, and emotional state. So when we kind of really have this capacity to really have control over it, we are much more happy as individuals, we're much more productive, and we're much more able to kind of, go out there and do a better job. We use mental fitness because I think the association with mental health still unfortunately has a lot of stigma attached to it. And as much as I fight hard to end that stigma, it's still there for a lot of people. So when we go into workplaces where people still statistically feel if they have a mental health issue, they are unlikely to get the promotion, or they worry that it's going to affect their workplace, their careers, sorry. Mental fitness is about all the positives of mental health, because that's what mental health is. It's about being able to operate in a really, really good place. So having that work-life balance, about being resilient, about being able to manage stress and anxiety levels. It's all the good stuff. And that's what we really focus on, is really how do we make sure people at work are mentally fit and able to have the right mindset and energy to actually be more productive in their workforce. And we find when people can operate in that space, they're much more creative. They are much more able to work independently, make more calculated, rational decisions about things they need to do. And it's in those moments when we feel disjointed from all of that, that we start to have kind of issues around what we then think of as our mental health. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely, yes. And I love the fact that you also brought into the description stress and anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
I love that, because unfortunately people underestimate how much it impacts. I mean, work and life balance, I think people are still somehow finding their path in the work and life balance nowadays. But stress and anxiety, it was always there, it is here, and I think it will be there for forever, because again, there's so many things which actually makes you anxious, which makes you stressed.
Mm-hmm.
Could you please elaborate more how actually people could control that? What can they do about that? Because I think it's such a thing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the first thing to remember about stress and anxiety, it is a reactive state to a situation that perhaps we find overwhelming. So everybody's heard of fight and flight. And actually, that's what's happening when we get stressed, is if we take it back in time to when we were a caveman and we were going out and facing that saber-toothed tiger, that was an adverse and overwhelming situation where we had to make a decision about whether to fight it or run away. And actually, what our mind's doing at that time when we're faced with a more stressful, a pressurized deadline, we're actually going into that state. We just haven't learned that it's not life-threatening at that point in time. And we produce chemicals in our body. Mm-hmm. So we tell our mind we're stressed, and our mind produces all the chemicals that associate with it. So adrenaline and cortisone and all these things. And that is where we get the physical symptoms, the increased heart rate, the kind of need to be fidgety. Actually, that's our running, where we burn off more energy. So we're getting ready for that moment where we have to fight, except we're never burning that off nowadays. And we can sometimes live in this perpetual state of stress. And that's when it becomes negative. Same with anxiety. There is a massive difference between being anxious and having an anxiety disorder. And I think we really need to understand the difference. So anxiety is fear of something that might happen. An anxiety disorder is when it has really become part of your everyday life. So someone that, and it can be behavioral, something like obsessive compulsive disorder. It can be the fear of going outside. So these are very, very different things. But in the workplace, anxiety might manifest itself as fear of going into that meeting, because we've got ourselves so worked up about it. So what I like to say to people is there is good stress and there is good anxiety, because it's those moments where we get that extra boost of adrenaline and cortisone and all these types of things that we get to that deadline, we work harder, we put in the extra effort, and we find the energy from within ourselves to actually go out and do what we need to do. But we need to learn to recognize the signs of when things become unhealthy. So when it starts to have a detrimental impact in our life, and I think of I kind of compartmentalize it into three areas. There's changes in our emotions, changes in the way we behave, and effects on our physical health.
Oh, love that.
So I spend a lot of time teaching people to recognize what those changes are. And learning to recognize them at a level where they can do something about it before they actually get into the place where it's impacting their lives on a daily basis. So I can share some of that with you if you want me to.
I was actually going to ask you, could you please share with the audience which are the symptoms, how they can recognize, because so often people live in these states and they never know where they are right now emotionally and how much stress they're experiencing, how much anxiety they're experiencing, and actually when it becomes like almost like new normal. So could you please share how people can recognize whether they are experiencing this anxiety or maybe it's already become quite severe?
It is. And I think the key thing is that not everybody experiences anxiety and stress the same way. We all have different tolerance levels. So it's very, very personal. So I can talk about some of the symptoms, and the listeners out there may associate and recognize some of them, and they may not with others. But really, it's important to say, is this a change from how I would normally feel, behave, and react? So kind of, things with feelings, we may find ourselves crying more. being tearful, feeling ourselves just inside, having that feeling of being overwhelmed. That feeling that everything is on top of us, that we can't cope. Some people even describe symptoms of feeling separate from their own bodies, like they're watching what's going on around them. And they may get feelings of feeling sick. And there's a link that with physical symptoms, but we'll come to that in a moment. So it's all these kind of things that are changes for us. So changes in behavior. So I'll bring up the alcohol, changes of how much we drink. So obviously some people will use a glass of wine to relax at the end of the day. And I'm not here to tell people that that's not the right thing to do. Yeah. But I think it's about, if we are in a state of stress, being anxious about how much more we might be drinking. Has that glass turned into a bottle? But it's the same with if you smoke or vape, or if you're a coffee drinker, or a binge eater when you're stressed. It's noticing that I'm eating more, I'm drinking more, I'm kind of going out to smoke more, all of those things. That's the time to say, I could be stressed, I need to do something about this. And then we've got changes in our behavior. And usually what I find is that other people will notice changes in your behavior before you notice them in yourself. So when we've been at work, our colleague that sits next to us might notice things about us and be able to point them out beforehand. But we're in lockdown now, most of us still. Yeah. And we're not working with people, so they're not seeing us. So it's about really becoming self-aware about what you're doing. So I used to sit next to someone, and when they were stressed, they would break the end off a pen.
Oh, wow.
And I've actually done that with this one, but not because I was stressed, but I used to always know, because they would start flicking it and then suddenly it would snap. And that's a change in behavior. People pulling at their hair or biting their fingernails, real common one. And excuse the lockdown route, but sitting with your head in your hands, really not knowing what to do. Yeah. We don't always do that. It's that overwhelmed feeling. We may find ourselves unable to make decisions where normally we could. We might be looking for reassurance more. So is that right? Did I do that right? Is that a good way of doing it? So really at this time, it really is about self-awareness around those things. I've talked a lot, but there's also the physical sides as well.
Yes, and I totally appreciate that actually you brought them up, because I think it's really important to recognize when you do this stuff. And the reason why I think it's so important, because I see it sometimes at my clients, when they come back and I see their, especially when we speak and I see them fidgeting too much or like clicking pen all the time. And I'm always questioning, is everything all right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it is about addressing that. And very often they would not even notice that, but they actually do. But then there are a few very common things or common behaviors which are left, right, and center when you go to the meetings to observe them. For example, people playing with their rings and watch or bracelets. For example, them shaking feet and like shaking legs. Would you say these are also signs of stress and anxiety?
I mean, sometimes they are. If it's a change in behavior for you, yes. I mean, some people use flicking bands on the wrists to cope with stress and anxiety and things like that. So it's might not necessarily be a sign, but if you've not seen them do it before, it could definitely be a sign. People become more twitchy. I think it's just this whole persona of not coping as you normally are. And certainly when we start to look into the physical symptoms of anxiety, we have to be really careful and make sure to rule out other medical conditions with our doctors first, because some of the symptoms can be associated with other medical conditions and not necessarily be anxiety too. So heart palpitations, high blood pressure, feeling dizzy, physically being sick, those are all associated symptoms of stress and anxiety in severe cases. But you need to make sure that there's not something else wrong first.
Yeah. And what would you say about skin issues? Because I'm not sure if you if you were ever coming across Louisa Hay, because she talks a lot about how our body shows symptoms, what's happening with us mentally. And she talks a lot when skin issues appear, that very often it indicates stress, anger, and anxiety. What are your thoughts on that?
So when you talk about stress conditions, you mean blotchiness and redness, or
Yeah, yes.
yeah, I'm probably red and blotchy now. Not because it's bad stress, but because I'm doing something different and perhaps a little bit outside my comfort zone. So it's not necessarily huge symptoms of bad stress, but it can be signs for people. So there's so many things, and it's about learning about yourself. And learning your own kind of tolerance levels.
Love that. So basically what we can say right now here is observe your own behavior. And when you see you do something different outside of your normal behavior, and that represents a bit of maybe you're rushing somewhere in terms of what you do, you're clicking pens, you're shaking your feet, or anything else, that means start observing yourself. So if somebody observe themselves and they see lately they are showing anxiety symptoms, what can they do with that?
Okay. Well, there's quite a few things you can do. I mean, there's what we call self-care and maintenance. So doing things for yourself every day to keep yourself present and in the moment, and to take time out from those kind of levels of stress and anxiety. And certainly over lockdown, I've spent a lot of time on things, talking to people about what they're doing. Sometimes it's as simple as taking the dog for a walk. Some people find they've taken up new hobbies like knitting, or they find cooking helps them. And it's about finding the right balance for you to give you time to actually, recover from your day, or to explore some of your thought processes with you. I know a lot of people find being outside and exercise really helps their levels of stress. But that type of thing doesn't help you in the absolute moment of kind of, how do I cope when my boss has just given me something else and I really can't, cope with that. And I mean, if you're okay, I'll share a couple of those with you that I talk about.
Yes.
So there's one called HALT. And I encourage people, when they're feeling their levels of stress and anxiety, is to stop or halt, because we know that there's certain things associated with stress and anxiety. So it's, am I hungry? Which is the H. Am I angry? Which is the A. Am I lonely, or am I tired? And particularly now, the loneliness, one of being in isolation or lockdown, or with a restricted interaction, becomes important. So I say to people, if they're feeling it, is to actually halt and ask themselves those questions. So if you're hungry, go and eat something, because it will affect you. If you're angry, you need to find a way to positively or handle that anger. So find ways in which to kind of get rid of that. If you're feeling lonely, is to reach out to someone you trust. And obviously, if you're tired, go rest. And sometimes what you find, that's even just halting or stopping, brings back that balance for you, because you realize what's happening to your body. So I encourage people to try it. It is amazing. You wouldn't think that just saying halt to yourself actually would stop you from kind of going into there. But again, it's that awareness, and you start to do something with it. And the big one, as all therapists will do, is breathe. Just breathe. Yeah. Really getting into the habit of noticing your breathing and slowing it down. And there's lots and lots of methods of kind of learning how to slow your breathing down. Deep breaths in through your nose, hold, and out through your mouth. And you can say all sorts of, breathing in positives and breathing out negatives. There's all sorts of things you can say, but breathing has a really, really fundamental positive impact on stress and anxiety levels.
I love, and thank you so much for sharing that. Actually, we're thinking on, I should have typed maybe whilst you were talking, but then I don't want to distract you from me typing and also make the noise. And then amazing Usman Mahida on Facebook, those who cannot see this comment on LinkedIn or YouTube, actually typed that and he says, hold, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. Thank you so very much for typing that, Usman. Really appreciate that.
Well, what I can do is I have a slide. I'll tag it to the Facebook so everyone can pick it up if they'd like to.
That's fabulous. That would be absolutely amazing. Thank you so very much.
No problem.
I love the comment here from Diana, who actually, she says she switched to watching on YouTube because I usually see my friends Howard and Maria here. Amazing. See, we have like regular people coming here. I love that. Thank you so much, Diana. So Louise, these are lovely practical tips. Cultivating daily self-care habits and responses to triggers is the best way to a happy and balanced life. Well, thank you so much, Diana, because this is so true. And yes, Louise, thank you so very much. It's amazing what you're sharing here. And Howard, actually, he's blown away. He says, hi, Diana, I'm here. You said as we have conversation, they have conversation.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
I have been quiet due to the fascinating words and advice from Louise. Oh, thank you. This is so special. This is on YouTube, those who cannot see it on Facebook, on LinkedIn. And actually on LinkedIn, we also had quite interesting comments. Abney says, today's topic is very necessary to all those people who work 9-to-5 job and feel stressed most of the time. And Louise, I think it's quite interesting comment. Do you think it relates only to those people who work 9 till 5? Because I personally think it's probably across all industries and all time shifts. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, everybody suffers with some levels of stress and anxiety, and I think it's, you know, we find situations to always stress about something because that's a normal learnt behaviour for us. But I think, you know, I deal with it specifically in the workplace because poor mental health can be very, very aggravated by workplace. And it's not necessarily driven by it. You know, for some people, they're taking, you know, personal issues into the workplace. And if they then feel overloaded or unable to cope or not set up for success by their organization, you know, it exacerbates it. And there is a responsibility now. It's not only about our own self-care. Organizations have to, you know, be responsible and actually think about, you know, their people. And certainly I find with the organizations that I work to, there's been a massive shift in the past, even 3 years in a very, very short period of time. You know, even if I look back 5 years ago, we didn't want to talk about this stuff. We were maybe throwing a little bit of mindfulness in for people. Whereas, I mean, I'm a big supporter of mindfulness. I practice it every day. I'm not a practitioner because there's other people out there that do it much better than me, but I love it. And I think it's something we should all get into the habit of doing. But from a workplace perspective, I think they're becoming more aware. And certainly the conversations I'm having now about, we call it understanding the mind of your organization. So you know, you don't know what your people are thinking when they come to work. So we put on amazing personas. So we put on our work armor and we go in and to be in the workplace. As an employer, you're not necessarily always seeing the real person. So I could be in there looking, you know, glamorous or whatever it is and feeling confident and doing all this. And yet underneath, I'm suffering dreadfully with anxiety and I've got issues at home, but I'm not bringing them to work. So when we get a chink in our work armor, to chink it, you know, imagine the crack that's underneath if it's chinked our armor. So I think it can really, really have negative effects. But businesses are paying attention now a lot more. And if I hope one of the really positive things that comes out of, you know, all the awful things, we all have mental health to one degree or another, and we're not all mentally fit, and we really, really need to concentrate on that.
This is so powerful, and I love the fact that you actually shared what people can do to deal with that. And thank you so much for addressing the importance of that, because I think if we just start paying more attention to the symptoms and we will start deal with that, what's going to happen, the next generation definitely will be probably less stressed and will have less anxiety symptoms and less anxiety. But Louise, I am very passionate about preventing things, because I think it's almost like, why to fix something if actually we can prevent it? So whilst right now businesses are stepping on this ladder of preventing stress and anxiety and reducing the amount of things which are happening at the workplace, what at the meantime they can do to prevent it? Because whilst it's quite hard to step out of the box and start preventing, but what would you pay more attention to actually prevent it?
Okay, well, I will have a view, and not everyone will agree with what I'm going to share, but this is my view. I have found in the past that organizations have been very reactive to dealing with mental health issues, and many have seen it as a tick box exercise. So I'll put in a well-being policy, tick. I'll put in some mental health first aiders, tick. I'll put in a training course on awareness, tick. And that is what they've done. And then they're wondering why it really hasn't made a massive impact. And what I can talk about what I do. So I work with organizations, as I say, to understand the mind of the organization. And for me, this is about really understanding your staff's perceptions of their mental health and their mental fitness. So when I talk about staff's perceptions, it's important because, as I explained earlier, you're not necessarily seeing the real person. So we do it in quite a methodical way. So we have an online tool that tests an individual's perception of their own mental health. It's just an online questionnaire. And from that, we can extract information from at an organization, departmental, and individual level to look at, within what we call our mental fitness foundations, where are the biggest gaps? And then you can tell an organization, your biggest gap within your organization is around this. And it's competency based. We have 12 competencies in our foundation. It could be around resilience. It could be around respect. It could be stress or anxiety. But we've given them quantifiable evidence to actually then go away and make proactive investment in where they know there's issues within the kind of organization. And as I say, you can break that down to team level and then break it down to individual level. But one of the interesting ones that we have in there is sleep and the effect that sleep has on our mental fitness overall. So there's some interesting things. So we really want organizations not just to throw money at it. We don't want them to just do a tick box exercise. We really want them to do something, quantifiable, that they understand is the right things, that then individuals can relate to within the organization. And also, hate to say it, at an organizational level, there's a bottom line. Where's the investment in this? We can measure return on investment because we can measure increases and improvements in individuals' mental fitness. So there has to be, I suppose, an element of rigidity in that to satisfy organizational needs and KPIs and all of that stuff. But actually, by doing it, we really, really hit the right points for organizations on what they need to work on.
I love that. Okay, so basically what organizations can do is to contact you, to have you there coming and assessing the situation, and also put in place what is necessary to deal with mental fitness at their workplace. But how about individuals? Would you work actually with individuals as well? Or is it just businesses can actually hire you and have you to help them?
Yeah, so within the business, that's where we offer our mental fitness coaching. So that is really, really based on helping individuals. And particularly, we believe it has to be mirrored at the top first to disseminate down. And coaching is a really effective way of changing behaviors and attitudes because it's very personal and very much on an individual level. So we don't limit the size of the organization that we do. I myself and my business partner Kirsty at the moment don't operate into individuals coming off the street, but we do have mental fitness coaches that we know that do. and we'd be more than happy to connect people.
Mm-hmm.
So there's power in everything, but you can't be all things to all people. And just given our backgrounds, we've worked within the corporate environment for 50 years between us. We're really trying to drive that change there. But yes, the understanding of what we do is absolutely relevant at an individual level too, because this is about home and work. They're intertwinable, and we sometimes think we have to separate them out, but actually it's quite hard to define them individually.
Absolutely, especially when you have some really profound and deep issues at home, which actually are living in your body and your mind 24/7. And then you go to work. For example, let's bring a clear example here. I came across many men whom I was coaching when they were not feeling or not allowed, but they were not exposing them being masculine enough at home. So, and their wives or girlfriends, they'll be very pushy, they'll be very dominant, and they'll be quite masculine. So because they were not able to use their masculinity at home, they would actually bring it back to work, and they'll be extra aggressive, they'll be bullying, they'll be very disrespectful to other people because they were not having the right balance between polarity at home and the amount of the masculinity which they were using at home, they were overcompensating at work. And this is just one of the examples how people sometimes have issues at home with something and they go back to work and they overcompensate, which they don't receive at home. And that can affect people so hugely, isn't it?
Absolutely. And think of a child that plays up in a playground. Massive correlations between taking things out of home and play acting what you want things to be or how you perceive they should be, or acting out what's being done to you at home as well. So those kind of things are very, very insightful. But we don't explain that home piece at work. There's certainly relationship issues they need to resolve there. But yes, it definitely can come out in those polar opposites within our behaviours. And it is difficult to then work with that if the person isn't actually recognising that in themselves.
That's very true. And I love the fact you actually brought a child here as well, because what happens nowadays, because back to old days, when Howard actually says, back in old days, it was very much a case of pull yourself together or get a grip, which is true. So as a result, we have generations living in a state of pulling yourself together, getting a grip, not speaking out, not sharing. And then if before, back to old days, not like I don't remember that, but I know that, right? When men were providers, women were at home. So women were having less stress, apart from maybe worrying whether their husband will come back from dangerous job or not. But now both men and women are at work and they both experience stress and anxiety. And then I believe, and I say it within my clients, that it affects children because now they see their parents not speaking out, not sharing. Now they see their parents actually releasing their anger onto each other and also the child or children, if there are a few of them. And they think this is the normal. And that's the dangerous game because where's the exit from here? And then we have generations growing up with these, I would say, even hereditary anxiety because they think this is the normal.
Absolutely. And anxiety can be a learned behavior. It's very common that those that suffer with more anxiety disorders have actually got parents that experienced it themselves. And I think as well, to whoever made the comment about pull your socks up and just get on with it, we still have people of all generations still believing that because of our parental influence. And if that's your boss, that makes life very difficult for you.
Absolutely. And this is so scary because I love how early on you mentioned that it should start from the top and then to go to the bottom of the organization, because this is so true. When you work with the other levels of organization, but the top SEO director, whoever it is still in that state of releasing the anger, releasing the stress, or even just being anxious around others, even though, let's call it fixed, they will still mirror that behavior, and that will affect all other levels of organization. So I love when you say that it always should start from the top, but going across all levels, so everybody actually has the way how to deal with that. Really.
I think when you're dealing with it, you've got to have that bottom up, top down approach. You've got to
Yeah.
build it from both ways so it meets in the middle and gels perfectly.
Absolutely. And especially considering how many people, when they have high position, they got used to the thought that they have to look professional. They have to hide emotions. But anxiety and stress is also emotion, right? When you hide all emotions, you hide also those emotions. And what happens? You become that rock, which is, yes, physically unshakable, unbreakable, nothing can impact you. But deep inside, you destroy yourself.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. And I think, there is a certain type of character that really fights to get to the top, and they've got that fight within them. And one of the things that I've noticed and is very, very powerful is a lot of these very senior executives of organizations actually now sharing their own personal challenges with their mental health, being really open and honest about it. And I'll tell you, 3 years ago, you wouldn't have had that. We've come a long, long way in trying to break the stigma. We're not there yet, though, I'm afraid. And I think we've got a long, long way to go. But while we have, leaders that will role model attitudes and behaviors and really role model them properly, not just because it's the right thing to do, then we've got a fighting hope of actually creating these kinder cultures, and I think the demand for a kinder culture that's more inclusive and more tolerant of these things is definitely what they're going to need to survive the coming years.
Love that. Love that. Well, Louise, it was such a powerful topic. And actually, we have compiled saying it really informative and interesting. Thanks, Louise and Olga. In fact, I was discussing with one of my colleagues who is in quarantine from last 5 days. Well, you see, that's why Louise is here, because it is so important. That's why Louise does what she does, because if we don't start fixing this situation where all organizations are right now, and why I say all, because some will be more, some will be less, but actually I think across all organizations, this should be observed and that should be dealt with. Otherwise, we're going to be facing next few generations living in probably deep depression. But we're going to have deep depression not because of crisis, but we're going to have deep depression because people never dealt with their emotions, and they never dealt actually with what was causing them to feel a certain way and what was causing them to feel anxious.
Yeah.
Because after anxiety, actually depression follows. So let's prevent that. Wonderful. But Louise, thank you so very much. I cannot thank you enough for all your wisdom today, because you not only share the symptoms, how people can tell physical and emotional when they're anxious, you also told us about how it can be fixed, not only by ticking boxes you have policy about mental health, but actually bringing somebody like yourself and many other specialists into the organization and dealing with what is wrong. And also, which is beautiful, you shared how we can prevent us being anxious and anxiety at the workplace. I'm really grateful. Thank you so much, Louise. And
it's been my pleasure.
Oh, thank you. And everybody who was watching us, pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for your comments, whether it was Facebook, Instagram, YouTube or LinkedIn. Really, really grateful. I know you cannot see each other across all 3 platforms, but because we are on 3 platforms, which I think is quite amazing because it helps us to spread the word.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it's a delight to speak to everybody, and look after your own mental fitness.
Thank you so much, Louise. Before we finish off, would you like to share how people can get in touch with you? Of course, I will tag you and I will share your contact details, but is there anything else you would like to share with the audience before we finish off this show?
Well, you can get me through LinkedIn at Louise Scott. My business is called Mind and Mission, and my website is www.mindandmission.com.
That's wonderful. Thank you so very much. Well, Louise, thank you once more. Thank you, everybody who is joining us. Wherever you do, enjoy this day or morning. Some people say good morning. It's fun. You have the entire day. Hey, how amazing is that? Or enjoy your evening time if you're somewhere abroad, far, far across the pond from us. So thank you so much, everybody. Louise, I'll be looking forward to have you at some point back again, because this topic is It's so important. And I think we definitely need to address more and more about that particular area at the workplace. So thank you so much, everybody. Whatever you do, enjoy your day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Much love.